What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and a couple of announcements before we start this video. The first thing is that for those of you guys who are part of the Facebook page, facebook.com/comicsexplained, I'm restructuring it and reworking it from the ground up. A lot of you guys will notice a lot of the posts are gone, and that's because a lot of the posts that were made on there were done by links as opposed to directly uploading the videos to Facebook. It wasn't until I brought Gordon on board and then we started working more with the Facebook page that we actually started uploading videos directly. So a lot of those links are taken away, which means a lot of those video series on there are somewhat incomplete. I'm in the process, or at least myself and Gordon are in the process of going through and completing all those. So you're going to see a lot of videos being uploaded in a really short amount of time. So don't panic. I'm not trying to spam you guys. We're going to keep it reasonable so we're not blowing up your Facebook feed with like 50 videos a day or something stupid like that. The other part of this is I want to put a bug in your all's ear that I'm currently working on a project that I think is going to be amazing. I think you guys are absolutely going to love it. It's really going to sort of elevate the kind of community that we have in a way that we haven't really been able to do before. I don't want to drop too many spoilers at the moment, but it's awesome. I think you guys are going to love it. I know we're excited to do it here over at Comics Explained. I'm very hyped to see what it turns into. But yeah, with all that being said, guys, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back to covering Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. And this is going to be kind of an interesting story. This is one of the stories we did not cover the first time around, right? We left this bit of a story out, which in hindsight seemed like a big mistake because there are two big things that come out of this story that go forward into the future of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, right? Two very, very, very important things. And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, right? And once you guys will see one of them and you'll recognize it right off the bat, right? If you were part of our original videos, like you'll recognize it right off the bat. The other one might take a little bit more poking around. But what this does here is this initially picks up in New York, right? With what amounts to like this giant crater in the ground. Now, of course, you've got Maria Hill who responds. Now, for those of you guys who are coming from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and you're aware of Maria Hill, but you don't know how she became director of S.H.I.E.L.D., she's been that way for quite some time. She really kind of rose to prominence as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. during the events of Civil War. Now, there were some things that led up to that, and originally it was Nick Fury, but Maria Hill's been director for quite some time, and the reality is she's probably the most hated director. Now, she's been the director really from the events of Civil War running all the way up until the modern era, and it wasn't really even directly Civil War. It kind of was Civil War, and then Tony Stark basically ended up more or less winning, quote unquote, the Civil War conflict, for lack of a better word, and that led to him becoming director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then when he was more or less forced out, and the whole thing was disbanded, then it was reformed under Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, and then he was defeated. That led to the reinstatement of Maria Hill as a director of S.H.I.E.L.D. But basically what this means here is that she's kind of been running S.H.I.E.L.D. for quite some time. During Civil War, she was hated, right? But like, I hated her. I was like, dude, she's a terrible person, right? But it was cool for Marvel to be able to write her in such a way to where, you know, I had an extremely emotional reaction to her character in the sense of like disdain, right? Like, it was just great writing on behalf of Marvel. But the reason why they're here is because, of course, there's this massive crater. You've got S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who are on site basically responding to it and essentially telling her, hey, like, we called you here for a particular reason. And that's because the body of Hank Pym was found here, right? The body of Ant-Man was found at this location. And so what we end up doing here is kind of jumping back by 4 hours and picking up with AIM Island. Now, AIM is an organization we've talked about before, but we haven't really gone super in depth. So AIM stands for Advanced Idea Mechanics. And this is an organization that was originally part of Hydra, right? So Hydra was basically formed by Baron von Strucker with a little bit of a throw in from the Hand in Japan. AIM was a scientific arm of Hydra, right? Where Hydra was kind of like this overarching force. AIM were the ones who focused on the science side. And they had a whole bunch of different events over the course of the years, right? AIM, for example, they were the first ones to tap into and create a cosmic cube. Advanced Idea Mechanics has had some pretty notable roles, but what's happening here is they've basically managed to capture a kind of artifact, right? To pull an artifact through their technological device, right? Their portal, more or less. And the whole thing is being watched over by Minister Superior. Now, Superior is an old school character. When I say old school, I mean relative, right? She was created in the Captain America comics in 1991. Originally, she was a character who formed a group called the Femizons, right? The idea was that she wanted to basically dominate all the men across the world. Her campaign was put to an end pretty fast, right? She wasn't really a major villain. She's never been a major player, right? But at the moment, she's currently the Scientist Supreme. Now, the role of Scientist Supreme in Marvel Comics exists in a couple different forms. You've got the Scientist Supreme of AIM, which is basically what they call their leader, and then you have your Scientist Supreme of Earth, which is where this kind of recognized as the best scientific mind on Earth, and it's usually recognized by a higher power beyond the advanced idea mechanics. You know, for example, Hank Pym was recognized as the scientist supreme. He's the scientific equivalent of Doctor Strange, basically. And so it's kind of a cool little thing. It's important to differentiate between those two things so you don't get them confused. But the whole thing's being watched over by her. And this whole kind of portal, this whole kind of device they have is designed to basically reach into alternate realities. Now, the reason why this matters is because the device really only ever seems to encounter beings in alternate realities when their universe is ending, right? Because remember, the incursions are happening. And so advanced idea mechanics is aware of them. They're aware of these incursions and everything going on. And so this device that they use to pull things in is the same device that was used to pull Hyperion from his dying reality. And so with that happening, with the portal basically being open, the device going in and basically opening up and allowing beings to pass through, what we end up getting are what initially looked like the classic Avengers. And it's kind of crazy because if the device can reach through space, then it can reach through time, right? Because time and space are the same thing, right? You can't, adjust one without adjusting the other. And so it's kind of cool because this kind of group here is sort of looking at the situation and it's kind of like, okay, this is advanced idea mechanics, like this is kind of crazy. And initially, like they kind of have a little bit of a conversation of sorts. And it's kind of like, okay, like when advanced idea mechanics reveals like, hey, you're on AIM Island, then like it almost kind of breaks out into a bit of a skirmish. And in fact, the Hulk almost begins to launch an attack against them, but then he's basically told to stand down by the Avengers, which he ultimately does. They go back into the portal and then they basically leave. But the funny thing about this is they don't teleport back to their universe. Instead, they end up elsewhere in the main Marvel universe. They end up in New York. And so of course you've got Ant-Man, you've got Thor, you've got Hulk, you've got pretty much the classic Avengers roster as we knew them, right? This is the original, not really the original, this is Avengers number 4 going forward. And the reason why I say Avengers number 4 is because that's where you ended up having the discovery of Captain America. The only person that's major and absent here, I would say, is probably Namor the Submariner. The cool thing is that they kind of harken back to their own reality and basically realizing that like that universe was coming to an end between what they were told by advanced idea mechanics and between what they've kind of figured out here, or at least recalled insofar as like when basically an incursion was about to take place and their universe was about to be destroyed, that the portal opened up and they were basically kind of yanked through, right? They ended up basically jumping through to save themselves. As they start to make their way around, Thor looks a lot more nefarious, right? And he kind of looks at these people around here and is like, why are you not kneeling before me? Well, if you're not going to kneel, then that's fine. Let me give you a taste of what it means to be a god, and uses his power and kills people. And it's kind of like, okay, like this is a little bit bonkers, right? So jump back to the present moment right now. You've got Maria Hill, who's basically there in S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, or at least S.H.I.E.L.D. scientific base. She's talking to the Avengers and she asked the question like, where were you 3 hours ago, right? Like what were you doing 3 hours ago? And the reason why that question's being asked is because as soon as this whole event takes place, right? As soon as all this goes down, you basically have, advanced idea mechanics that kind of hits the panic button. Now, this is just kind of a brief jump back. We're not going to stay in this 1 month ago period, right? So don't really focus on the fact that it's a month ago. But what this basically shows us is that at some point in the past, advanced idea mechanics had discovered the Avengers in the midst of them basically recovering from a massive incident, right? This looks like one of the big catastrophes on Earth that's taken place during the event so far, but they end up sampling DNA from like Black Widow and Thor, Hyperion. They're basically going through and siphoning off DNA samples from these various guys, right? And so pick up a week after that, and you basically have them kind of synthesizing the DNA, analyzing the DNA, and then, basically 2 weeks after that, you've got advanced idea mechanics doing what they usually always do, creating super adaptoids. Now, the reason why this matters is because super adaptoids are originally an advanced idea mechanics creation, and they're exactly what they sound like. They're beings that are designed to adapt to various superheroes, right? To take on their powers, to take on their abilities, and so on and so forth. And in fact, the super adaptoid itself, which was the first iteration of that character and kind of went by his namesake, was probably one of the most capable villains the Avengers ever faced, right? Because he basically had all their powers. He could adapt to all of their abilities. And that's kind of what seemed to happen here, right? And so jumping back to about 3 hours ago, where we pick up with these Avengers from this alternate reality, having laid waste to the entirety of New York. The reason why these super adaptoids being created by advanced idea mechanics matter is because this is cleanup duty. They don't want anybody to know that they brought these individuals here. And so they basically dispatch the super adaptoids to face off against these Avengers. And for the most part, the super adaptoids are almost completely and totally overwhelmed. The difference here is that the super adaptoids were programmed to basically subdue the Avengers and bring them in. Now, one of the other things that goes on here is that you've got Bruce Banner, you got the controller that's being used by Wasp, and it basically, like when it's destroyed, the Incredible Hulk reverts back into Bruce Banner. That matters. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But one of the super adaptoids begins to basically kind of violate his own programming. That instead of bringing in Hank Pym, the super adaptoid actually kills him. But the death of Hank Pym, this is one of the single most important things to happen in this comic. And this is one of the things that you kind of get into when it's Jonathan Hickman tying into everything else, right? But the long and short of this is that's where the body of Hank Pym comes from. That the Avengers basically managed to get away, and that the super adaptoids are recalled by advanced idea mechanics. And so the whole attempt to basically capture the Avengers is considered to be a failure. And so what this does is it picks back up in the current moment right now with the proper Avengers, right? The Avengers that we all know being questioned by Maria Hill and basically saying like 3 hours ago, like Black Widow was getting her nails done and Carol Danvers was working out, Thor was drinking, Iron Man's like, I was getting my nails done. But basically Captain America's like, whatever it is that you believe you have going on didn't have anything to do with us. Enter Hyperion, basically using his Superman-esque powers more or less, analyzing the body of Hank Pym and coming to the realization that's not our Hank Pym. That's a Hank Pym from a different universe. I don't know what the deal is with this guy, but he's not from here. And that kind of goes into the investigation of the Avengers, trying to figure out who these other Avengers are. Now, what this does is it basically leads to this revelation that where all the Avengers from the alternate reality left, and they basically went to a different location, not back to their reality, but they went back to a different location. This leads to the discovery that Bruce Banner from that alternate reality Avengers has actually made his way to where the main Marvel Universe Bruce Banner apartment resides. And when he gets there, of course, he finds Bruce Banner from the main Marvel Universe. So you've got these two versions of Bruce who are basically encountering each other. Now, the follow-up to this is that where the super adaptoids are put back into their stasis cells, that the one who killed Hank Pym basically begins to think for itself. And that's not how they're supposed to work, right? The super adaptoids are programmed for a particular cause. They're programmed for a particular action, and they're not supposed to be able to deviate beyond that particular action. But this version basically becoming self-aware and almost kind of becoming sentient and essentially indeed becoming sentient leads to it actually modifying the other super adaptoids. These beings were originally created for the purpose of exploring the multiverse. That was the whole idea behind advanced idea mechanics designing them the way that they were. But what ended up happening here is that with them basically being sent after the Avengers, it basically seemed to be the catalyst for why it is that like this one adaptoid managed to break away from its programming. It was being tasked to do something that it wasn't originally programmed to do, albeit its programming was still intact. It was basically just told, on your way to exploring the multiverse, take those guys out instead, right? It was AIM hitting the panic button. But this one small change allowed it to begin deviating even further away from its programming. And so what it does here is we basically jump back to these two Bruces talking to each other, right? And we'll basically say Bruce 1 and Bruce 2, because what you get here is this kind of explanation to a degree, right? This sense that you have basically, you know, we'll say Bruce 2 is the one from the alternate reality and Bruce 1 is the main Marvel Universe Bruce. And Bruce 2 basically reveals that where Bruce 1 can kind of, you know, he turns into the Incredible Hulk whenever he gets angry, Bruce 2 basically says it used to be that way, but the Avengers on his world effectively lobotomized him, and he doesn't really have any access to the emotional centers of his brain. The only time he becomes the Incredible Hulk is when the circuitry inside his brain that was implanted there by the Avengers is remotely activated using that remote control, and they can basically turn him into the Incredible Hulk anytime they want to. And it's one of these things where they're basically shown to be bad guys, that these guys are basically, you know, bad Avengers, right? Because what it does is it leads to the main Marvel Universe Avengers ultimately tracking down these alternate reality Avengers, and then of course a great big huge fight breaks out. And so it's kind of nuts because where Iron Man is facing off against this alternate reality Iron Man, Tony Stark is kind of like, okay, like where this alternate reality version is like, you're a Stark, are you the Sun or something like that? And the response of Tony is, yeah, I mean, I'm the Sun, but like, who are you? Like, what's your deal? And this guy basically reveals that he's Jarvis. He takes the helmet off and says like, I killed you as soon as I got the chance. Like I killed your father after he built the machine, you know, and then I smothered you in your crib, right? And then I took your Iron Man tech. And of course that leads to Tony Stark freaking out and attacking him. For Captain America, he's a villain in the sense that like he's a general, right? And he's just a nefarious guy, right? He doesn't really have any particular powers. He's still kind of Captain America the way that he always was, but like he's just a villain. From there, you also have the alternate universe version of Thor. And of course, it's kind of one of these funny things because initially he holds off on fighting the main Marvel Universe Thor and it's like, hey man, we can be friends, right? Like we can team up and we can basically conquer this world together. And the response of the main Marvel Universe Thor is, of what good are you if you can't watch your backside? Which of course leads to Hyperion swooping in and defeating the evil version of Thor. Now, when the hammer falls, you end up seeing that it says Thor with 2 R's. And it basically says, whosoever lifts this hammer or holds this hammer, if they be unworthy, shall possess the power of Thor. That'll become important later on. If you are familiar with that, do not spoil, please, for the love of God. Please, for the love of God, do not spoil for the people who have no idea what that means. And so, of course, you basically ended up having one of the Bruce Banners who was subdued by the other, and then the Incredible Hulk popping up here. Now, the fact that the controller was destroyed and the fact that we're basically dealing with, you know, this Incredible Hulk here really points to the idea that it's the main Marvel Universe Bruce Banner, right? That's basically who this is, like the good guy Bruce Banner. But the cool thing is that he kind of shows up here and basically allies himself with the evil Avengers. Now, this leads to advanced idea mechanics firing what's called a tachyon ion cell, which basically encases the entirety of both Avengers teams and then freezes time inside, right? So for them, inside this bubble, time is completely frozen. The important thing is that once Advanced ID Mechanics goes in, and then once they get out, everything will start to return to normal. And so they basically grab the Avengers, abscond with them, and then take off. While that's happening, these super adaptoids basically open the portal that accesses the multiverse and walk through, and basically walk through to fulfill their purpose and to chart the multiverse. And so from there, we pick up with this last little tidbit of the story. And we have Bruce Banner, who goes walking into Stark Tower and basically starts having a conversation with Iron Man. This takes place before the fight between both Avengers teams, right? So it's kind of this little intermediary period. As soon as that version of Bruce is defeated by the main Marvel Universe Bruce Banner, he dons his outfit, takes his briefcase, and then walks to go see Tony Stark. And as he starts talking to Tony, it's one of these things where he's kind of like, Bruce Banner knows something, and Tony's kind of trying to catch up with what Bruce Banner knows. Now, the funny thing about this is the way that Tony plays it. Tony Stark does not like to look like he doesn't know what's going on in a room, right? He likes to be the guy who feels like he's got it all figured out. That's the engineer in him, the narcissist, that's the arrogant part of Tony Stark that wants to believe he's the only one that really has it all figured out, or if other people have it figured out, he's following right along with them. But he basically starts talking to Tony about like this whole program, right? This Avengers initiative that they have in effect created, right? This whole Avengers initiative program that's been launched by them. And the question is, with everything that's been going on with this Advanced Idea Mechanics retrieval unit, grabbing that Avengers team and then whisking them away and all that kind of stuff, with everything that's happening with regards to all these events, what Bruce Banner's been doing is Bruce Banner has been thinking. When Bruce basically went alongside the Avengers and then snuck off, and then basically, talked to Advanced Idea Mechanics to understand what's going on, that what Advanced Idea Mechanics revealed to this version of Bruce, because he's like, hey, I was the Hulk at the time, I'm regular Bruce now, what's going on? And he basically says, well, I mean, if you really want to know, like, what we understand at this moment is that, like, the multiverse is dying. Every universe, like, what you have out there in the multiverse is you have Earths that are crashing into each other. And if both Earths make contact, then both multiverses or both universes are destroyed. If one of the Earths is destroyed, the universes pass through each other, right? And so he's like, Advanced Idea Mechanics is like, from what we gather, that's what's happening. And what we're doing is we're basically just trying to explore. We're trying to understand it. And so that's when he basically turned into the Hulk, started freaking out and destroying everything. And then of course he shows up here at the office of Tony Stark. And what he basically says is like, after learning that from Advanced Idea Mechanics, after learning all of that, I've started thinking, I've started realizing that some of the most pivotal events that we've been to, the events where like we were fighting the Builders in space, that you weren't there, that Reed Richards wasn't there, that Black Panther wasn't there, that Doctor Strange wasn't there. Like a lot of these guys that I know are not there. So my question is, why did you build the Avengers team? And what's actually going on? Is the multiverse actually dying? And initially, like, Tony Stark starts to dodge the question, right? He tries to like avoid the question, dodge the question, and he starts saying like, you're building this big Dyson sphere around the sun, except like when I was there, it's obvious from the design that you have no intention of finishing it. So you're using it for a very particular purpose, but you're not going to weaponize the sun. And even if you could, it's not going to do anything. So my question is, what's the point of all this? What's actually going on? And that's when he kind of starts to sort of assemble everything together and say, it's actually real, isn't it? The multiverse is actually collapsing. And then Stark again kind of tries to dodge it. And that's when Bruce Banner corners him and says, you did it, didn't you? You reformed the Illuminati. And the response of Tony Stark is yes. And then Bruce starts injecting himself with tranquilizers. Now, the tranquilizers aren't necessarily designed to like put him to sleep. They're designed to keep the Hulk from manifesting, because the more that Bruce is hearing, the more pissed off he's getting, because he knows, just like we know as the reader, the reformation of the Illuminati is never a good thing. It's always a bad thing when that happens, because it always leads to problems. And so Bruce starts asking like, what have you guys done up to this point? Have you guys actually destroyed worlds yet? Is that why you guys are building weapons? And the response of Tony is, this is about as real as it gets, man. Like, it's not some alien invading force that we can fight off and live another day. That's not how this works. These are Earths that are showing up, and if they crash into ours after an 8-hour window passes, our entire universe is destroyed. There's nowhere to run. Now, the reality is that there is, and that's one of the things that Black Swan talked about, is that there are realities, there are universes out there where the superheroes of Earth bailed on that universe. They basically opened a portal to a different dimension and then took off, and they left that Earth to die along with everybody with it, and then took off to an alternate reality. Sometimes they encountered worlds where there were superheroes. Sometimes they encountered worlds where there were no superheroes. That was the case with the evil Avengers that showed up from the alternate reality that Advanced Idea Mechanics brought in. They were sent to a different world where there were no Avengers. They would just kind of jump into a new world, and literally it's just jumping a sinking ship. That's what it's called. It's considered to be a cowardly thing to do, but there are people out there who did it. There are other instances in other realities where superheroes on Earth actually destroyed their own own planet to keep the universe from dying, and then took up residence on a different planet inside the universe, right? So there's been different people who have reacted in different ways. But the question of Bruce Banner is, what's going on with your plans? What have you done? You know, and that's where Tony basically says, we haven't really destroyed a world yet. We haven't had to, or at least we haven't destroyed an inhabited Earth yet. We have not been met with an Earth that has superheroes and has human beings living on it that we've actually destroyed. We've been lucky. But the reality is, if it comes to that, I don't know if that's something that I'm able to do. And the response of Tony in saying that, in saying like, I don't really know if it's something that I am or am not willing to do, means he's preparing himself to do that. And that's the reality of it, is that time is going to come when they're going to have to destroy an inhabited world in order to save their own. And so with Bruce basically realizing this, that's when he starts to get angry, and that's when he starts to freak out, and he says, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Am I supposed to keep it to myself? The fact that the multiverse is basically dying, that like the potential is going to be there for you guys to destroy an inhabited world with billions of innocent lives to save our own? Is that something that I'm supposed to be okay with? Like, do I hide this from Steve Rogers? Do I hide this from like Betty Ross, you know, or like Thunderbolt Ross? Do I hide this from people? You know, do I keep this to myself? And so what this does is it basically leads to this alternate reality Bruce Banner basically, you know, kind of showing up here, or at least being met by Tony Stark. And what Tony ends up doing is basically saying, hey, look, you know, Banner's pumped full of tranquilizers. You know, we got to kind of keep him on ice until things are okay. Tony attaches a device to the back of his neck that basically keeps him from being able to talk. And so this Bruce is just kind of more or less hidden away, right? He's basically just taken away and locked in a cell where he can never become the Incredible Hulk again. And that's where this whole thing dead ends into the Acropolis. Now, the Acropolis, as most of you guys probably know from the previous videos, is the Wakandan city of the dead, right? That during Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, because of the story Doom War, basically showing that T'Challa lost the role of Black Panther to his sister Shuri, you know, he was basically just a guy who was there. And so when he went to visit the Panther god Bast basically gave him dominion over the dead, right? His ability to communicate and talk to the dead. And so with this place basically being an exceedingly sacred location, no one's allowed here except for T'Challa. He's the only person that can get in here because he's the only person that needs to be here. He's the only person that can talk to the dead. I mean, I guess Shuri can do it too, but it's one of these kind of respectful things, right? She kind of maintains that level of respect. But the reason why that matters is because what this means is that the evil version of Bruce is basically locked away. He's hid away. This allows for Bruce Banner in the main Marvel universe, for Tony Stark to pass that alternate reality version off of Bruce as the main Marvel universe Bruce. So as far as everybody out there is aware, Bruce Banner sitting in a prison cell. It means that he can now operate in secret without anybody actually knowing what he's doing. And that's exceedingly important because he's now being introduced and being brought into as part of the Illuminati. And so from there, we switch over to the second epilogue here. And this is probably one of the most important parts of the story. And the reason why is because as these super adaptoids are cruising through the multiverse, they end up discovering this kind of space station, more or less, that exists between universes. And what this does is it basically has them landing on its location. And when they get there, they're met by what are basically map makers. And that's where the kind of questions asked by these map makers, do you know what you are? Like, what was your purpose? You know, and they say, well, our purpose was to explore, right? That was the entire basis behind us. Then the map maker's like, but you've surpassed your creator's intentions, haven't you? And the response is yes. You know, and so ultimately, you know, when the question's asked, you know, what are you? The adaptoid responds, I'm an explorer. And the map maker responds, no, you're a map maker. This is where the map makers come from, right? The map makers basically originate, and we'll find out more in terms of where the original map makers came from and how it is they kind of propagate themselves this way. But the quick answer here is that map makers come into existence when a form of artificial intelligence basically reaches sentience, right? When it reaches a super high level of intelligence. But there's a reason why that happens. It's not simply just because of the fact that this one particular super adaptoid managed to break away from its programming. There's also something else at play here. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like. Now we'll catch you all later. Peace.